Today, Energy Minister Ron Liepert announced that he has accepted the report of Alberta's Regulatory Enhancement Task Force, which has been working since March 2010 to develop reform recommendations to the regulatory approvals process that is applied to Alberta's oil and gas sector. I'm recording this as a supplemental to 3 media interviews that I gave today reacting to this package of reforms. Reforms which are now going through the government review process for implementation. I think that there are 3 important points that need to be made about this announcement. The first is that it creates a policy management office whose job it is to integrate the natural resource policies. These are policies that are under the mandates of the Department of the Environment, the Department of Energy, and Sustainable Resource Development, and any other ministries that are deemed to affect the environment in some way. So the Policy Management Office is going to integrate the policies of ministries that have 3 often different policy mandates. The Department of the Environment, which is supposed to protect environmental quality, has a very different mandate from the Department of Energy, whose job it is to see that there is no molecule of fossil fuels left in the ground beneath Alberta's surface. So integrating, how these things get integrated is a concern, and it's even more troubling when we look at how the policies of these respective departments have been created. If we think about policy coming out of the Department of the Environment, anybody that has any experience in those discussions knows that these are always multi-stakeholder advisory committees. You have environmentalists sitting at the same table as the industrial interests, and whatever outcome of those discussions for policy recommendations are compromise values between environmental protection and economic interests. But the same does not hold true for the resource extraction ministries. There aren't multi-stakeholder environmental advisory groups to the Minister of Energy who are making compromises or getting the energy companies to compromise on the extent that they're to be exploiting fossil fuel resources. So if this policy management office is going to be integrating the existing body of government policy as it affects the environment is paying double jeopardy, because policies that were compromised between environment and economic values when they were being developed in the Department of the Environment are potentially being compromised a second time. So I think that the first major concern with this announcement is the potential for environmental double jeopardy. Secondly, the task force proposes to completely eliminate public interest group participation in the actual facility approvals process. They propose to create a separate public engagement process that would enable public interest groups to engage in the policy development phase of policy, but have no role in the decision making where that policy is actually applied to an industrial application on the ground. So to illustrate what that could mean is that you could have an organization whose sole purpose it is to protect endangered species, and they would participate in creating the broad policy that says endangered species should be protected. But when the time comes to actually apply that policy or argue that that policy should apply to a particular industrial application, they would not be allowed to participate. It is made perfectly clear in the report that this is the case. They say, and I'll quote from the report, that the authors write, "To be clear, participation of the landowners and others with private interests who stand to be directly affected will not be changed." So what they're saying explicitly here is that in the so-called public interest decision making on specific approvals, only private interests will be allowed to participate in the decision-making process. And so groups, public interest groups that might have a role in advocating for the proper application of a policy in a particular instance would not be included. And I think that's the potential for that to be the case is a problem with this recommendation, with this package. Thirdly, I think that the characterization of stakeholder involvement in this process is really outrageous. It's described, the press release describes it as having had the extensive engagement of environmental groups, and what they're referring to is 4 meetings that were almost ad hoc in nature, where people were invited. They were provided with no preparatory materials. Agendas weren't even given out until you arrived, and they sprung questions on you, and they sprung questions on everyone, and just wrote down the answers. There was no effort to compile, consolidate, come to any sort of consensus or any kind of agreement. And so what these decision makers were really handed were flip charts full of words that they could use in a way that they saw fit. And it's such a, what makes it particularly outrageous is that we operate in a province that has such a long history of effective stakeholder engagement. Engagement that would much better fit the term extensive engagement than what the Regulatory Enhancement Project Task Force did. Anyone that's worked on the air game through the Clean Air Strategic Alliance knows what extensive engagement of up to a year or a year and a half, serving on a multi-stakeholder negotiation team, overseeing the acquisition of needed research, overseeing consultants who get that research for you, and then debating the results of that in order to come up with a policy recommendation that all sectors could agree with. That's extensive engagement. And to call these 4 ad hoc meetings extensive engagement is a real disservice to the history of public stakeholder engagement in this province.